In 1337, war between England and France erupted for two core reasons. First, the English claim to the French throne. Second, England's long-held lands inside France, territories that had existed for generations. The English had once won spectacular victories at Crécy and Poitiers. But after those triumphs, much of their ground slowly slipped away. Not only because of swords and armor, but because of wavering resolve, caught infighting back in England, and the dark legacy of the Black Death, which shook European society to its foundations. By the early 15th century, English power in France looked like scattered fragments, nothing like a continuous empire. And in that moment, a young king stepped forward. In 1413, Henry V took the throne at just 26. He inherited a dynasty viewed with suspicion because his father had overthrown Richard II to seize the crown. So, in his early reign, Henry could not be certain his own throne would hold. Plots rose quickly and were crushed, but the aftershock remained. Tension between the nobility and the crown was unmistakable, and Henry understood something cold and practical. To secure his rule at home, he needed a victory big enough to convince everyone. He looked across the English Channel. France was unraveling. King Charles VI suffered severe mental illness. The royal government weakened. Power drifted into the hands of rival noble factions fighting for control. And Henry saw something strange, but obvious. The strongest enemy was weakening itself. So Henry issued demands on a massive scale. He demanded Aquitaine and the lands granted under the Treaty of Bretigny. He also named territories once tied to the Angevin legacy: Brittany, Normandy, Maine, Anjou, Touraine. He even mentioned Flanders, a region the original account stresses had never truly been in English hands, and he wasn't finished. Henry demanded France pay the remaining 1.6 million crowns owed from the ransom of King John II, captured after Poitiers in 1356. He also wanted to marry Princess Catherine, the young daughter of Charles VI, along with a dowry of 2 million crowns. The original source offers a comparison to show how enormous this was. A warhorse at the time cost roughly 80 crowns. That means 3.6 million crowns equaled nearly 45,000 warhorses. And by the source's modern estimate, it was compared to something like $550 million. In exchange, Henry promised to abandon his claim to the French crown inherited through Edward III, who had French royal blood through his mother. But France, already divided, could not accept demands that high. They counter-offered a 600,000 crown dowry and an expanded Aquitaine. The English saw it as an insult, as if they'd been mocked. And here's the crucial point. Even though negotiations officially collapsed in June 1415, Henry had been preparing for war long before that. He used the negotiation period to secure a decisive advantage: the support, or at least the neutrality, of John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy. According to the original account, that weakened France's coastal defences at sea. And when that shield began to wobble, Henry chose his moment. On August 11th, the wind turned favourable. The English fleet weighed anchor. The first target was Harfleur, a fortified port, long viewed as a thorn in England's side. From Harfleur, raids often struck England's southern coast. Taking it would reduce that threat and create a crucial foothold for the campaign, alongside Calais in the north. And right here, the central question appears: can a carefully planned campaign be broken by forces humans can't control: weather, disease, and terrain? On the afternoon of August 14th, the English landed near the mouth of the Seine. Henry decided to begin the siege immediately, cutting off reinforcements and supplies. His brother Thomas, Duke of Clarence, sealed the eastern approaches, while Henry deployed the main force to complete the encirclement. From that moment, Harfleur was no longer just a coastal town. It became a locked room, waiting to be squeezed by time and iron. To break it, the English had to bring forward siege engines and, most importantly, 12 cannons. The town held around 5,000 people. Its walls were roughly 4.5 meters thick, strengthened by water defenses and 24 towers. The harbour was well protected. The garrison numbered about 250 men. Henry sent a demand to surrender, backed by a threat. As the original account describes, he invoked biblical law. If the town refused to yield, he claimed the right to put the population to the sword, because he considered himself the rightful king of France. Just as the siege tightened, a small relief force slipped in, about 300 mounted men-at-arms under Raoul de Gaucourt. They weren't many, but they were professionals, and that alone hardened the defenders' resolve. The French also turned terrain into a weapon. They shut the sluices and flooded the valley to the north. The rising water wasn't for beauty, it was to make the war slow, difficult, and filthy. Tease. Harfleur refused to surrender, and when the cannons began to roar, the town would learn the enemy did not bring steel alone. He brought something invisible, something that could kill faster than arrows. The English guns opened up. In the early days, the barrage damaged walls and towers visibly. Some shots flew deep into the town, striking buildings far behind the defenses. For Harfleur's civilians, death was no longer outside the walls. It fell from the sky. But Harfleur did not collapse. Townspeople and soldiers worked the guns, the engines, and the defenses along the ramparts. They fired back, they harassed the attackers, and they inflicted serious losses on Henry's gunners and siege crews, men who had to move close to be effective, which meant stepping directly into danger. At night, the city did not sleep. The defenders repaired the walls in panic, patching cracks, rebuilding shattered sections. Each morning, the besiegers looked up and saw what seemed broken, standing again. By early September, after about 15 days of siege, the summer heat turned the flooded northern ground into stagnant marsh. The water fouled, the smell rose, and then the most dangerous enemy entered the English camp: dysentery. Tease. The cannons kept firing. But a new question appeared. If the English army began to collapse from sickness, would they still have the strength to win at all? Henry was forced to change tactics. He ordered mines dug beneath the walls to bring down the defenses from below. But Harfleur did not wait to be undermined. The French dug counter-tunnels, blocking the mines, destroying the works, even attacking English miners underground. War was no longer only on the walls, it was in darkness, where breathing and falling dirt sounded as loud as thunder. Above ground, Henry increased the pressure, pushing wooden siege towers up toward the walls. But time dragged on. The siege lasted nearly a month, not the longest of the Middle Ages, but longer than Henry expected, and far more costly. Sanitation in the English camp was miserable. Water supplies were contaminated. The original account even notes contemporary warnings about unripe fruit, grapes, and seafood, worsening the collapse. Men, horses, and livestock were packed together. Waste accumulated. Disease spread fast. Dysentery killed, and it also made survivors useless. Earls, knights, bodyguards, archers, men fell everywhere. Many were sent back to England by ship to recover once the siege ended, meaning, even before victory, Henry was already losing strength. Inside Harfleur, sickness appeared as well, according to reports cited in the original account. Yet the defenders still struck back. Gaucourt led a sortie, burning an English siege work and slipping back inside. It didn't just cause damage, it shattered Henry's sense of control. Tease. Henry reached a point where he couldn't retreat. If he didn't hit hard, right now, the entire campaign would die outside Harfleur's walls. Henry chose to gamble. He launched an assault on the outer defenses near the main gate. English archers loosed a constant storm of arrows, forcing defenders down and into confusion. The original source highlights a key detail. English archers used arrows treated with flammable material to ignite a tower. Fire opened a breach. Dismounted men-at-arms surged in and seized the advantage. Fighting was brutal. The French tried to push the attackers out of the gateworks. But under John Holland, Earl of Huntingdon, the English captured the outer gate defences. The defenders fell back inside the town. The next day, Henry demanded surrender again and was refused again. His anger became a method. He ordered horns blown for a general assault and kept the bombardment steady so the defenders could not sleep. This was war by exhaustion. Inside the town, fear spread. If Harfleur was taken by storm, the biblical law Henry invoked could become an excuse for massacre. Some of the townspeople began to waver, and that wavering opened the door to negotiation. Talks lasted 2 days. On September 18th, Harfleur's officials agreed to a condition. They would surrender if no relief army arrived by September 23rd. Agincourt sent for help, but received a cold answer. The French had not gathered enough to fight. No one came. On September 22nd, Harfleur surrendered. Part of the garrison was released under terms requiring them to report as prisoners at Calais. English officials took over the town. Some French civilians could remain if they swore loyalty to Henry. Others were expelled. But it was a bitter victory. The English losses were enormous, roughly a third of the army dead or unfit for duty. Henry was left with about 7,100 men. After several weeks of rest, he left a garrison, 300 men-at-arms and 900 archers, and marched out with roughly 900 men-at-arms and 5,000 archers. Tease. Harfleur was taken, but it still felt like not enough. And that feeling would pull Henry toward Agincourt. Henry now faced a strategic trap. His original plan was to capture towns and fortresses in northern France, then control and tax the countryside to fund the war. The campaign was backed by the public and the nobility, financed by major loans, and partly supported by taxes approved through Parliament. But Harfleur wrecked the rhythm. The army was exhausted by casualties and disease. Winter was approaching. Reports said French forces were gathering near Rouen. Henry's council advised leaving a garrison at Harfleur and returning to England to recover. Henry refused. He understood that taking one port and sailing home would not look like victory, not enough to secure his authority, and not enough to justify the massive loans already taken. So he chose action, marched to Calais to prove he could cross northern France without punishment. He ordered William Bardolph to the mouth of the Somme to secure a crossing point. Advisors urged the safer sea route across the Channel, but Henry wanted to go by foot, to display power and the ownership he claimed. Charles d'Albret would not let him go. Once Henry left Harfleur, d'Albret pursued immediately, calling local nobles to raise forces and drive the English west toward the Somme, trap them and destroy them. After 3 days, Henry reached the Somme and found no Bardolph. Instead, the crossings were blocked. The fast march collapsed. Henry was forced to move upriver to avoid being surrounded. d'Albret's positioning was skillful. Bridges and fords were guarded or destroyed. The main French force took positions near the plains around Péronne, while smaller units harassed the English, draining them day after day. Then Henry made a puzzling turn, leaving the river line and swinging southeast. The original source suggests one possibility. In a skirmish, the English may have captured French soldiers and gained intelligence. If Henry learned d'Albret was waiting near Péronne, the turn may have been an attempt to avoid the trap. Whatever the reason, the outcome was clear. Henry moved farther and farther from Calais. The English grew exhausted and demoralized. Rumors spread of a decisive battle ahead, near the river, where they would be cornered and crushed. On the 11th day, scouts found an unguarded ford. Henry crossed the Somme and slipped around Péronne, but the cost was brutal. A march planned at roughly 230 kilometers along the coast became a punishing trek of about 426 kilometers through the interior. The army was starving, sick, and worn down. Just when Henry believed he'd escaped, a French messenger arrived with a letter. D'Albret declared battle would happen before the English reached Calais. Henry drove his men northwest, trying to outrun the noose. Then scouts returned with worse news. D'Albret had left Péronne the very day Henry crossed the river, caught up, and blocked the road near Agincourt. Tease. Henry's road to Calais was cut, and on the night before battle, the greatest difference between the two armies would not be numbers, it would be discipline. The first day passed without major fighting. Night fell, and the French camp was loud. Food, servants, companions, laughter. Music carried across the darkness. Before battle, it wasn't unusual, but the English camp was different. Henry ordered strict silence. He wanted focus. He feared a night cavalry raid, and that fear wasn't imagined. A French force of cavalry and archers appeared close enough for a brief exchange of arrows. The original account notes reports that a few English archers were captured. Then the French withdrew. Rain fell hard. The air turned cold. That night became torture for men sleeping in the open. Yet Henry walked the lines, speaking to his soldiers before the day that would decide everything. The next morning was St. Crispin's Day. Henry had his men move out before dawn to show initiative, to show the French the English were not afraid. And when daylight came, Henry saw what the original account calls an unexpected opportunity. The night's rain turned freshly ploughed fields into mud. Not loose vineyard soil, this was heavy clay from the Somme region, holding water and clinging like glue. Henry understood immediately. Mud would slow cavalry and heavy infantry. He formed a defensive line. 3 blocks of dismounted men-at-arms in the center, smaller archer groups interspersed, and 2 larger archer formations on the wings, creating a slightly concave shape. Archers drove sharpened stakes into the ground to stop cavalry. At the same time, Henry secretly sent 200 mounted archers through woodland on one flank, waiting for a signal, an aggressive move in an area patrolled by both sides. The French deployed 2 major lines of dismounted men and men-at-arms, with archers and crossbowmen among the blocks, cavalry on both wings, and a third line largely still mounted. Some chronicles mention artillery, but the original account suggests it played little role in the battle itself. Numbers remain debated. According to the original source, after Harfleur's losses and the garrison left behind, Henry had about 6,000 men, roughly 1,000 men-at-arms and 5,000 archers. The source also stresses that the image of a massive French army is often exaggerated in modern telling. The work of Professor Anne Curry is cited to argue France likely could not exceed about 12,000 at Agincourt. French military expenditure records for 1415 list roughly 6,000 men-at-arms and 3,000 archers, plus additional forces raised in the weeks before battle, around 12,000 total. So France may have outnumbered England about 2 to 1, but the crucial imbalance lay among men-at-arms, possibly around 5 to 1. The armies formed up around 7 a.m., then stalled for 3 to 4 hours. Insults flew. But D'Albret waited. Henry was trapped by hunger. The French had food. Some older nobles suggested simply waiting until the English starved and collapsed. Near midday, many nobles sent for meals. Others rode back and forth to stay warm. Henry saw the truth. If he stood still, he would die of hunger before he died by sword. So he made a bold decision: advance. The archers pulled up their stakes, carried them forward, and set a new line. The French were forced to adjust. Then Henry signaled the 200 archers hidden in the woods. They fired into the French and shouted hunting cries, as if shooting French nobles were no different than hunting wild boar. The original account emphasizes how deeply insulting this was to a noble class that despised low-born archers. Pride ignited, and the French began to move, tease. And as France stepped into the mud, what they were about to meet wasn't just arrows. It was a chain reaction that would collapse their formation like a door being driven off its hinges. Just as both sides seemed ready to collide, Henry halted at maximum longbow range. The archers immediately drove their stakes into the ground again, turning the new position into a crude barrier, enough to kill horses and break momentum. French cavalry on both wings were ordered to smash the archer groups and clear the way for heavy men-at-arms to close. But the ploughed mud dragged at hooves. They were no longer an iron fist flying forward. They became slow, heavy targets in open ground. The original account stresses the power of English and Welsh archers in Henry's day. Bows stronger than the previous generation, arrows with armor-piercing heads. The arrow storm fell. Knights went down. Horses panicked, threw riders, and turned back, slamming into the French infantry advancing behind them, trampling men and cracking order. The cavalry attack stalled. Most survivors fled back in fear. The first line of French men-at-arms kept grinding forward through mud under arrows. When they finally reached the English line, many were already exhausted and wounded, yet sheer numbers still pushed the English back, at a terrible cost. In the mud and tight space, many French shortened their lances for close combat. But the English exploited reach and weak points. Legs and groin, areas less protected. Wounded men fell. Men behind piled onto them. Some were still alive, crushed in the press. The second French line entered in disorder. Instead of delivering fresh shock, it shoved into the chaos from behind, increasing the crush. And as the battlefield became a mass of bodies trapped in mud, flexibility began to matter more than armor. Now English archers dropped their bows and rushed into hand-to-hand fighting with swords, axes, hammers, and daggers. Lighter armored, they could move more easily in the mud, slipping into gaps in the French mass. Henry himself fought as well, because, as the original account notes, he had little real reserve to rely on. In the melee, many French prisoners were taken for ransom, as custom allowed. But then, a rear area shock changed everything. A local French lord appeared behind the English line with a small group of cavalry and peasants. The original account notes they quickly raided the English camp, stealing bedding and even a spare crown. Henry could not know whether the French would reorganize for a third assault, or whether prisoners might rise from within. Fearing a two-front disaster, he ordered the prisoners killed to prevent them joining another attack. He also sent a message to the French third line demanding they leave the field. Not long after, that third line withdrew. According to the original account, English losses were likely under 600. Among the dead were the Earl of Suffolk and the Duke of York, who was trampled in the mud. Henry reportedly shielded his brother, the Duke of Gloucester, when Gloucester was badly wounded during the fighting. French losses were catastrophic. 5 mass graves were recorded, each holding roughly 1,000 to 1,200 bodies. Total dead is often given around 5,000. With the original account noting the number may have been higher. Charles d'Albret was killed, along with the Duke of Alençon, Boucicaut, and many prominent knights and nobles. Agincourt, combined with Harfleur, was described as a blow that left the Kingdom of France reeling. Political consequences came quickly. Henry became a national hero in England as a clearer sense of nationhood was forming. Within weeks, he was treated as a major diplomatic figure in Europe. In 1416, Sigismund, King of Hungary, later Holy Roman Emperor, visited Henry, and the two formed an alliance described as beneficial to Henry. Henry returned to France to pursue Normandy. Rouen fell in 1419. That same year, the assassination of John the Fearless helped Henry secure an alliance with Burgundy. The chain of successes forced France into the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. Henry was recognized as heir to the French throne and regent. Catherine was married to him. Henry reached the summit of power while still young, but the story ends with a grim paradox. His health collapsed during the sieges of Melun and Meaux. In 1422, he died at Vincennes Castle at age 36, most likely from dysentery, the very sickness that had already ravaged his army since Harfleur. This story leaves a bitter truth. History doesn't always turn on a sword swing. Sometimes it turns on a river crossing cut off, a march twice as long as planned, and a rainy night that turns earth into mud. In those hours, discipline can hold people upright, even when they're afraid. If you'd like, share in the comments. What decided Agincourt more? Mud, the longbow, or the mindset of men who walked in believing, "Today I die"? And if you want the next story, where today's victory opens the road to tomorrow's tragedy, follow the next video on the channel.